I've served on a lot of nonprofit boards, and I can't tell you how many hours have been wasted of my life when they send me a board packet and then they regurgitate the board packet during the board meetings. Like, stop already. I can read. So let's instead use our board meetings for the strategic conversation around what would it take to create a movement around these ideas.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Campfire Circle. I'm your host, Tanya Bhattacharya, and I empower purpose-driven women in building influential personal brands that drive change and raise revenue. We all talk about getting a seat at the table, but why though? Who wants to sit in a stuffy boardroom anyway? Let's reimagine the ultimate space of leadership as a campfire circle, where we share stories that inspire movements, build brave communities to huddle together with for warmth, and where there is always room. Come sit with us. So we're here with Denise Brosseau, and I am honestly doing my best not to fangirl because when I served as a nonprofit executive director, I read her book, Ready to be a Thought Leader. And honestly, it was that book that gave me the roadmap. It taught me everything I needed to know to step into that role and start creating that ripple effect in my community. And now I get to interview her, which is such a dream. And I mean, what a life, what a life. I can't even. So let me tell you all about her. So after an early career in the technology industry, Denise co-founded the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs, the first trade association for women-led high-growth startups. She was also on the founding team for the first venture capital conference for women entrepreneurs. Those experiences took her from leader to thought leader and set her trajectory for the work she does today, helping others on a similar journey. She is the author of the bestseller I mentioned earlier, Ready to be a Thought Leader, and her thought leadership course on LinkedIn has been viewed by over 250,000 people all around the world. Denise, welcome to the Campfire Circle podcast.
Thank you, Tanya. So happy to be here.
Yeah, and I'm so happy to have you here. Well, I always think it's good to start in the beginning, and I would love for you, if you're open, to just tell me your story. Why and how did you become a thought leader on thought leadership?
Well, okay, but I have to start by saying I'm so happy to know that my book had an impact. For all of us, we put content out in the world. Like, does anybody listening out there? So, I really wrote that book to my younger self, and I'll tell you a bit about that journey and the crazy way that it came about. But, I wrote this book to this young nonprofit executive woman that I was, as you were, and, completely clueless. Yes, you know how to do your to-do list, and yes, you know how to, day to day. But if you're trying to make a bigger impact, that's the hard work. Honestly, there was nothing out there and, really no one to guide me at the time. And now that is really what I'm committed to. And that book is committed to exactly people like you. So this makes me very happy. All right. So where did it all begin? It began in a little town. No, let's not go there. So I came out of college with a degree in Russian studies, not something you have any idea what the heck you're going to do with it, thinking maybe law school. That didn't turn out to be the right path. So I kind of, was stymied in a number of different directions, like, that doesn't feel right. So anyway, took a while, but I found myself in the tech industry by the time I was about 25 and started my first company when I was 26. And the journey of sort of entrepreneurship, startups, technology kind of satisfied my soul for a few years, got an MBA at Stanford, and came out of there with this amazing community of women leaders. We weren't a big portion of our class, but we were mighty. And the other women that I came together with, really, one of them had the idea of starting this trade association for women entrepreneurs. Like at the time, I think it was less than 1% of venture capital funding was going to women. And we were just determined to do something about it. Now, fast forward many years later, my organization still continues today in its new form. It's called Watermark and based in the Bay Area. But the venture capital stats have not changed a lot. So, I did spend 10 years of my career really on that path of trying to make a difference for that world. But honestly, because I didn't have any of the strategies or understanding about how you make big impact, I was really just kind of in the blocking and tackling, open a new chapter, try to help one another, the next entrepreneur, versus really understanding how to have a real trajectory of change. And I think that's why I'm so committed now. So about 10, 12 years ago, I started my present company, kind of taking everything I learned from that journey and from working with others. And that's what I'm committed to today. I really work with women entrepreneurs and women executives and women leaders and a few men, right? But my commitment is really, how can I help leaders, executives, entrepreneurs make that bigger impact, really build those ripples of influence and create a legacy that matters to them.
I love that. First of all, I love that so much. Our missions are certainly aligned. And I have worked with a couple of female founders of behavioral health tech companies. Accessing capital has been a really painful, interesting, discouraging journey. And they haven't had access to the same networks, the same rooms, the same old boys clubs that, others do just by virtue of who they are. But to your point, I have really seen how thought leadership and consistently getting their message out there helps them get that seat at the table. Or rather, I don't even like to say seat at the table. It helps them create their own campfire, their own influential platform to attract the right investors to them. And I know you have obviously a ton of experience in this. And I'm wondering, Denise, if you could share any stories that you've seen of thought leadership really helping women create their own campfire.
Yeah, I think that the key here is understanding that is worth spending your time on, right? So much of the story out there is put your head down, focus on the to-do list, right? So much of the story is create the next product, the next service, improve the features, improve the benefits, and less, unfortunately, on that other piece. But, when you see stories, I don't know, Mickey Agarwal is the first one that comes to mind. So Mickey Agarwal started her first company when she was in her 20s. It's a pizza company in New York City, all healthy pizza, but really no idea about how to run a business, but very, very smart and savvy about using her voice and her platform. And within a short time, wrote her first book, which says something like Do Good Shit or something. I can't remember what it's called. And got out and started speaking and really building the community around this idea of entrepreneurship and taking action. And, since that company went on, I can't remember if she sold the first one. Anyway, she started her second company. She started her third company. And each time her trajectory gets bigger and bolder, and her platform gets more meaningful and more giving back all the ideas, the knowledge and expertise she has, but also bringing in partners, bringing in people who are paying attention to someone who is bold enough to share their big ideas, and someone who is bold enough to egg on others to go, get out there and be entrepreneurial. And so I know that, and I think she's got maybe a second book that's either already come out or just come out, but she's someone who's no question has used her voice and her platform as a way to scale multiple businesses. Her business is called Tushy. And in between, she had another one that I can't remember the name of. So yeah, she's really a good story on that.
Yeah. And what comes up for me around that is this work is really exponential. It's kind of like retirement. You put some funds in the bank, and over time, there's compound interest of this work. Because like you said, more and more people are just attracted to your mission, and whatever it is, the next thing you're doing, they're ready to be involved, right? So
yeah, it's that flywheel effect. Like the first couple of things you do, and this is why thought leadership can be a challenge. People don't see it as a journey. And so they start, do a few things, they put out some content, or they do a talk, they, put forward their perspective in an industry event. Maybe they don't get an instant response. Maybe they don't get instant traction for those ideas. And so they just stop, right? There's plenty to do. They get a lot of rewards for working hard. But what I say is that if it's a flywheel, you have to do those first efforts, because the flywheel is slow to start. But once it gets going, I certainly learned that in my own journey. We started the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs, and then I helped co-found Springboard, which was the first venture capital conference for women entrepreneurs. And that story, which was, 5, 6, 7 years after we started the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs, where we got, a little bit of press, a little bit of attention in the community. But when we started this conference, that became really the tipping point and pushed us in a new trajectory, because the press, as we got a few press stories about these women entrepreneurs who were presenting their businesses at this first conference, then that next story was much easier to get. And partially, I think, because maybe the newspaper folks are a little lazy and they look for an interesting story and then they do another story on the same topic, but whatever, it worked. And then that brought in partners, and that brought in a much bigger community of people to apply for the program, more sponsors. Like, it was all a flywheel that all began with a few somewhat painful efforts. But once it got going, it just really it continues to this day. Springboard continues to be at the forefront of the story of women's entrepreneurship and the growth of high growth startups and venture capital.
Yeah, it becomes a movement. And, I've gotten a little bit too excited and maybe a little ahead of myself. So let's back up just a teensy bit. I want you to help us define thought leadership, because I have definitely used the term thought leadership and personal branding almost interchangeably, but they're different. Can you define thought leadership and kind of tell us how they differ?
Yeah, I think of it partly going back to what we were talking about, that idea of a journey, that really we begin our journey by building our personal brand. And the personal brand is sort of differentiating ourselves from others, having some way that people can see us as a unique individual. And I think that's where we begin our work as executives, as subject matter experts, and so on. It all begins there. But the second piece then is I think the second step is becoming that respected expert. So we take our subject matter expertise and we become known for that. So what is the knowledge base that we are bringing to the community, and how are we out sharing that? I think that's sort of the second step in the journey. And it's an important step, because the third step is really thought leadership. And to me, that is about being that pebble in the pond, and what we've been talking about, creating that movement. So when you think about it, the first two are kind of bringing attention to you. The third one is bringing attention to an idea, bringing attention to a transformation, some actual undertaking that is going on in your field, in your community, in something that you are trying to make change around. So for me, certainly we were building the brand of me and the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs. We were building the brand of me and the respected expert status of myself as a knowledgeable person about women's entrepreneurship. But I think the reason that things tipped is because Springboard was about really sort of changing the trajectory of access to capital in people's minds. People saw it as that pebble in the pond, and that then began to ripple out in ways that perhaps the earlier efforts were built upon. But this third piece was our chance to really make that bigger and broader difference.
So I love that imagery. I love that imagery of pebble in the pond. It calls up that ripple effect or that butterfly effect, And I love this strategy because I tend to spend a lot of time with people who work on stigmatized issues like addiction or abolition work or psychedelic medicine or there's an element of disruption in their work, because you're taking a big problem or injustice and painting a new picture of what's possible. This is so juicy. There's so many places we could go from here. I get so excited about this kind of stuff. But okay, so something that has just come up for me is when you're dealing with this vision, this big vision for a changed future. For you, it was having a higher percentage of venture funding going to women entrepreneurs. And it just seems so big. It seems so dang big compared to where we are now. So how do we not burn out, right? Like, how do we temper these big visions with the reality of what can actually get done in one lifetime? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's such an important thing. And as I was writing my book, it was a core element of what I was trying to address, because there's two pieces to this conversation. The first is the burnout piece, which is thinking about this as a relay race and not that you're going to do it all. Like, to get from where we are, less than 1% of venture funding, to what I want, which is 51%, that is not going to happen in my lifetime. I think at some point I did hope and wish it would, but given how slow the trajectory of change was, we've never gone to more than about 8%. So we've got a long, long way to go. So you have to think about this as a relay race. And I think that that ties then in that sort of taking care of yourself and understanding your role in passing the relay is understanding then the second piece, which is the key differentiator often between leaders and thought leaders is the ability to distill the lessons learned, to kind of codify what are some frameworks, some learning, some blueprints, some how-to guides, as it were, that others can then pick up and learn from and carry forward, because that we don't want the people picking up the next step on the relay to reinvent the wheel and do exactly what you did. We want to be saying, okay, here's the 7 steps I learned, or here's the 5 important guideposts that you must follow, or here's, whatever it is, here's the lay of the land, you're mapping out the ecosystem, whatever you're doing to be additive in a way that others can pick up and learn from. I think that is the key element of that, being a thought leader and not just another leader in the long path.
And what comes up for me too is even this relay race spans lifetimes and generations, because we do this work so that our future generations can have a different life. And so in a way, we're trying to be good ancestors when we are doing this work. There's an element.
Have you read that book? It's such a wonderful book about being a good ancestor.
It is an incredible book. And I think I bring up the term cathedral thinking all of the time. We are starting cathedrals that we're never going to have the opportunity to sit in, but that's okay. That's life.
And some of the most beautiful places in the world that I've ever been are gorgeous cathedrals like Notre Dame, which has been such a sad journey to see what's happened to it recently. But I used to live in France and used to sit in that beautiful cathedral and just, imagine what it took to create that. I do think it is a beautiful image to imagine that we are building a foundation, or we are building a wall, or we are building a parapet, whatever it might be. Maybe we're doing the gargoyles. I don't know. But we need to each have our role to play and understand that burning ourselves out doesn't help get that cathedral built, right? We don't need any dead bodies along the road here. We need to all be taking care of each other. And the mentality, I think, is understanding that we're locking arms here. Like we're doing this relay race together. And that if we can find others, I think that was my big learning. It's like, I was operating by myself doing the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs in California, started a few cities around me. But then I get this call from this group on the East Coast who it turns out had been working on access to capital for women for decades. And I had no idea that I was standing on the shoulders of giants, right? That there would be many, many people who had been doing this relay race of women's access to capital for years before I came along. And that once they, that was the National Women's Business Council, once they partnered, or I partnered with them, I guess I would say, then they brought me into this community of all these others doing this important work in Chicago and Boston and DC, right? That kind of opened my door to new opportunities, but it also opened my understanding and my partnerships and actually my heart in ways where I was like, wow, look at all these amazing women, look at all these, and some men, right? But all these people who've been on this journey, who've been making such good progress for so long, we need to be working together more and sort of singing out of the same songbook more so that we can start to build that movement. We can start to not be just one off across the city, across the country, but working in concert.
Something that's coming up for me now is that so many of us, whether it's in the nonprofit world or otherwise, we think of communication as a cost center, like a tactical thing, like keeping our website up to date. But in actuality, especially for these stigmatized issues that I love and live in, I think communication and thought leadership is the work, because it is the work, right? Because it changes hearts and minds, right? In a way that creates openness to usher in change.
And that's really the definition of thought leadership, or successful thought leadership, is that we can change the way that people think about the world, or we change the way in which people actually act in the world. I was a quote from someone I interviewed a couple of years ago, and it's always stuck in my mind as such a powerful model of success, because that's how we know. It's not just writing for the sake of writing. It's not acting for the sake of acting or for looking big. And my quote is from my book that I repeat often is, thought leadership is not just about being known. It's about being known for making a difference. Like, are we being that pebble in the pond, or is it all about our ego and making ourselves look good? And hey, look at how my blog has 4,000 followers and yours only has 2. That stuff all has to be left by the wayside. And we need to really be of service to the community. That's when we can have an impact.
that is so it. That is so it. I want to get into some of the barriers here. And one of them you've really touched upon already, and it's that never ending to-do list. And you have experience in the nonprofit space, as do I. And it's just, there's always another thing like, oh, I just got to bring these board members together. Oh, I just got to get this thing up and running. There's always something to do. So do you have any specific advice, or what would you say to a budding thought leader, a change maker who just can't figure out how this thought leadership work can fit into her schedule?
Yeah, I think that you've really hit on a absolutely big challenge and the solution in the same question. And I think the challenge and the opportunity is, what about those board members? What about that community you're serving? How could we enlist and enroll them in the actions as well? So, for example, I've served on a lot of nonprofit boards, and I can't tell you how many hours have been wasted of my life when they send me a board packet and then they regurgitate the board packet during the board meetings. Like, stop already. I can read. So let's instead use our board meetings for the strategic conversation around what would it take to create a movement around these ideas. What could we be doing to enroll and enlist the platforms of all those people that are already involved in our organization, whether it's our staff, whether it's our volunteers, whether it's our board, whether it's our advisors, whether it's our funders? How can we be giving them messages and action points that can be helping to both propagate our messages, but also add to our messages? Like, what are they saying that we need to be aligning to? What are we saying that they could be aligning to? And really have the conversation in those board gatherings, in the time that we're spending with volunteers, to not just give them another assignment, but really get them thinking and strategizing and then taking action around using their social platforms, using their voice in the community, using their reputation on behalf of the cause that they obviously care about.
That is such a win-win-win-win-win, because you've got the mission moment happening and the board members are becoming more invested and passionate and excited about the work. And you've got this codifying going on, like you mentioned earlier, where this expertise is being disseminated out into the universe through these board members' spheres of influence. That's a really beautiful example. I love that. I love that.
And I personally would like to go to those kind of board meetings, please.
Yes.
I want somebody to call on my heart in a board meeting, plus my brain, plus my ability to get in action, instead of another, first I'm going to, yes, I support this. Yes, I second. Yes, so much boredom in these board meetings, and it's such a waste of everyone's time.
I know. I think of it as like that noise from Peanuts when the teacher was talking. It's like, wah, wah, wah. There's so many better ways we can spend our time, and it's this work. So, we've talked about, okay, so I think of the big barriers and as the 3 S's, right? So there's strategy, not having a strategy. And I think the solution to that is literally just buying your book and reading your book. That's what I did, and it worked out.
It worked for me.
Yeah, it worked for me. And I think the second one is the schedule piece. And we've talked about that, right? Using our ambassadors. But let's talk about self-limiting beliefs, because I think that's the real juicy issue here. The one that is kind of the real issue. Because if you are intentionally disrupting the status quo and introducing a new way of doing things, it's to be expected, right? That you're going to get some haters, and it's that scary. So what would you say to people who are nervous about getting more visible in this way?
Well, yeah, this is the hardest part, isn't it? And it's why I spent a whole chapter in my book sort of gathering ideas from lots and lots of different people on how they did that. Because every thought leader I spoke to as I was writing this book, or my clients, people I know, my own experience, like I'm always trying to dig in, like, how do you get beyond what one of my clients calls the itty bitty shitty committee in our brain, right? There's that very loud voice in there that is saying, who are you to be the one? And, what do you know anyway? And nobody's going to listen to you. Or worrying about the naysayers, worrying about that the potential attacks. I think all of that is the hardest part of this journey. And I think there's a couple of things that I've seen over and over again that have worked. One of them is absolutely about finding that bigger story, tying ourselves to the bigger story, like kind of getting out of our own way about the small stuff by realizing how much work there really is to be done. And that, yeah, you may not make the biggest difference in the world, but you got to do your small part. I think that can really help for some people. I think another is absolutely finding the buddy, the coach, the mastermind, the advisor, somebody who's going to be somebody you can pick up the phone and go, everything's terrible and doing your own wah, 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 kind of piece. I think that for me, I was very fortunate that my co-founder was also the board chair for 10 years while I was CEO. And, she was always that ally and that strategist and that kind listening ear when things were not going so well. So that I think is hugely helpful. And then I think the third thing is some little tricks that I learned from others. So one of the ones that I talk about, you may remember from the book, is Chip Conley, who's written, 4 or 5, 6 books now, and is someone that I truly admire. He says that the way he started writing and consistently writing was that he would get up at the crack of dawn because he said that his brain was awake, but his inner voice was quiet at that hour. Mm-hmm. And I've always found that those kind of little tricks, like for me, I started using that. I get up in the morning and I don't do anything but feed the cat, brush my teeth and sit down to start writing, because there's just no voices yet. There's none of the outside voices coming into my head. I just sit down and start writing. And I think that we have to find those tricks that work for us. We have to find the ways in which to clear the outside voices. And then finally, we need allies. So let's say somebody attacks you. Let's say somebody comes at you in an online setting, or it's happened to me in in-person meetings as well. Having other allies in the room, having other allies who follow you, who will come in as well. Now, you can fight back, but it's all the better when you can get someone else either in the room or online to be the one saying, shut this down. You are attacking someone who's doing a lot of good. Here's the positive. We don't need this anymore. So I think that there is models for using allies in all kinds of settings that can be helpful.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a ton of sense.
What works for you, Tanya?
Well, somebody once told me that if you don't have any haters, like you're not doing it right.
Absolutely. Nobody's paying attention if there isn't someone who's unhappy.
Well, that's right. And especially for this particular work, because again, it's that there's that level of disruption. We're trying to create a different world. And so, and people don't like change. People are afraid of change. And so if everything's hunky-dory all the time, like maybe you're not sticking your neck out quite enough.
Yeah. And so maybe you're advocating that go get a few more this year. And I think that there's nothing wrong with having people who disagree with us. Somebody that I think put in a book talked about how that really those complaints are actually recommendations in disguise. So if there's something that they're complaining about, can we find the kernel of an idea in there of things that we might change, improve, add ideas of ways in which to change things up a bit so that people can hear us? A lot of it is being able to welcome some ideas that are foreign to us and then inviting them to do the same.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's right. That's it. Another issue that I've had floated by, which is a bit of a barrier, is that the person I'm talking to is not the CEO or founder. And so they're nervous to start putting out this type of work, this type of content, because they're afraid they're going to step on someone's toes. And so can you answer the question, can there be more than one thought leader in an organization?
Yeah, in fact, I think the best CEOs are the ones who are recognizing that their voice only plays in certain communities, and that the best thing they can be doing is leveraging those other people within their company and organization whose voice might be heard by a different community, have a different set of connections. They're going to now be welcomed into the conversation because they are inviting, whether it's their technology person to be out talking to the technologists, whether it's the person who's the fundraiser who has a completely different community. I think everybody, at all levels in an organization and all levels in a company, they have their own platform, and we need to be leveraging all of that. And so the other half of that is what do we do when we want to be that voice? And maybe our CEO isn't quite as enlightened as I'm hoping. And I think for that is that there is a way in a lot of different platforms now for us to state right from the beginning, these are my ideas and not the ideas of anyone any company I work with or anyone I'm affiliated with. So I think we need to be very crisp and clear up front. Secondly, I've seen clients of mine who have agreed upon platforms that they're allowed to play on and others that they're not. So financial services is probably the hardest, but I've certainly seen this in the utility industry and others where, these kind of public forums, anything related to financial, anything can be construed as advice and will get you into all kinds of regulatory hot water. But if you're talking about women's leadership, or you're talking about some technology transformation that's happening in the world, you're not going to run into the kinds of issues. So you do need to find what the guideposts are. You need to find the platforms where it's less threatening to your organization. And finally, you need to absolutely start by stating, this is me, this is my voice, these are my ideas.
Mm-hmm. Great points. Great points. And I would think that LinkedIn would probably be one of those platforms. That would be a great place to be.
Most of the time, yes, most of the time. Some people find Medium is even better, but I find LinkedIn is my place to play.
Your playground.
Absolutely.
So, when I think of thought leadership, I oftentimes think of writing. But what about folks who they're just not into writing? Maybe they have other talents. Are there other options to get started with thought leadership other than writing?
So many, which is such a wonderful thing. I think we do get stuck in thinking, I got to go write a book. It's like, no, unfortunately, there's not. So, for example, I have a person who I know well, who I love. She does a 1 minute, sometimes they're a little longer, but she does a 1 minute video once a week that she sends out to her community that's really establishing her thought leadership. I've certainly had other people who are speakers. I have one client right now who is extremely good on stage. And what I try to do is then take her content and repurpose it into written pieces, because that's not her medium, but she's so articulate. She's got very thoughtful frameworks behind her talks. I can take and see what she's saying from running, I have her record it and do the transcripts and then help turn it into content for her. So I think that video is a great way. Speaking is another. And then I think the third that we often overlook is being the convener. So when we think about how you create a movement, right, you've got to bring people together. And it doesn't necessarily mean people who we never see. It could be people that are in that same realm that we are playing in, getting them all to the table, getting them all to agree on those messages, all to agree on some shared action. That's when real change can happen. So if we think about the major movements, women's right to vote, how many times did those women come together for over many years in order to strategize, in order to identify the leaders who were going to do X, Y, or Z? I think any movement, it takes convening. So being the convener, the person who sets the agenda, the person who invites the right people to the table, who guides the conversation, that's a hugely important role in thought leadership.
And I think that role can be really appealing to a lot of people who don't necessarily think that they could ever be a thought leader. But you're right. That whether it's hosting a summit, having a book club, starting a flash mob. I mean, that's a joke, but maybe.
Flash mob idea. Let's do a flash mob about one of your favorite causes. That works for me.
I'm in. Just tell me where to show up and I'll show up.
Heck, I want you up on there. I want you out there doing that.
Totally. Jazz hands and everything. As we wrap up, so creating a vision is so important to this work, because if you can't paint that vision, you can't get people on the journey with you and you don't know where you're going. So I always love asking this question to all of my guests. What is your big vision? What is your big vision for the world?
Yeah, my vision is guided by a class I took in business school many, many years ago now. We were asked to sort of create our vision, our mission statement, as it were, to guide our own lives. And for me, it took me the whole quarter, I think, before I could finally come down to something that would guide me. And so for me, it's always been more women leaders at the top of every organization. And when I think about making choices, how can I do more of that? And it's whether it's as women entrepreneurs, women as executives, women as leaders in their community, that my vision is that I believe the world will be a better place if we have more women leaders at the table as electeds, all of the different things. So every piece of work, whether my nonprofit or my for-profit, has always been guided by that vision of more, and by the way, more diverse women, right? And that's been really transformative over the last few years to understand that this conversation is much bigger even than just women. I want women of color. I want people of all kinds of backgrounds, but I want more women out there.
Hear, hear. Here. I'm with you. I'm on this journey with you. We're going to make this happen.
Locking arms here. Yes.
We're in the relay race. That's for sure.
Yes, we are.
So how can our listeners get in touch with you, and how can they work with you? How can they get involved with you?
Well, thank you for asking. My website is thoughtleadershiplab.com, and I have a wonderful set of materials that I give people who join my mailing list. And I also have an email newsletter. You can also find me very actively on LinkedIn, which is just my name, Denise Brosseau. And I have 2 LinkedIn learning courses on thought leadership and organizational thought leadership. And I have a newsletter on LinkedIn as well. So those are kind of all the ways. I do work individually with executives and entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders on how to really make that journey from leader to thought leader. So always, and I do a lot of speaking. So always happy to have conversations on any of these topics: women's entrepreneurship, women's leadership, and thought leadership. Those are my wheelhouses.
Well, and that's a beautiful thing. And, we started this conversation talking about how your work has impacted my work. And really, I think that's so important because as we close out, I just want to mention, this work, you don't always know who you're reaching. In fact, most of the time you have no idea who you're reaching. You're just yelling into the void. I mean, it's strategic, but in some ways it feels like you're yelling into the void. And so I think just know that your impact, Denise, has been monumental. And, thank you for the legacy that you're leaving.
Thank you. That really touches my heart and it keeps me going, right? That's part of that flywheel. When we get that positive reinforcement that the work we're doing and the ideas we're sharing matter, that's what keeps us in the game and keeps us pushing forward. So thank you for sharing that. That really makes my heart sing.
So good. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Denise.
Thank you for having me. Great conversation.
What'd you think? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, or even better, reach out and let me know through lumosmarketing.co. Yes, that's Lumos, as in the illumination spell from Harry Potter. Because when you shine, magical things happen. You can get social with me on LinkedIn, and of course, check out the show notes to stay in touch with our guests. Let's talk soon.